Chapter 3. The Realization of Socialism Through Social Reforms. Bernstein does not believe that society will move to socialism by waiting for capitalism to collapse. Instead, he talks about how capitalism can change on its own. But he only hints at how this change will lead to socialism. Conrad Schmidt tries to explain this idea in a similar way. He says that when workers fight for better hours and wages, and when people work for more reforms, they will slowly gain more control over how things are made. As laws weaken the rights of the capitalist owner, the owner will eventually only act as a manager. The owner's property will lose value to him until, finally, he loses all control over how work is run and a system of shared control is put in place. So, according to Bernstein, trade unions, social reforms, and more democratic government are the ways to slowly build socialism. But the truth is that the main job of trade unions, as Bernstein explained in 1891, is to help workers sell their labor at the prices set by the market. Trade unions let workers take advantage of the current market conditions. However, the factors that decide wages, the demand for workers, the supply of workers from the middle class and new workers, and how productive work is at that moment, are not controlled by trade unions. This means trade unions cannot stop the law of wages. Even at their best, they can only force capitalist exploitation to stay within what is normal at that time. They do not have the power to end exploitation, not even slowly. Schmidt admits that the trade union movement is very weak at the start. He hopes that in the future, trade unions will have more power to control production. But controlling production only means two things: getting involved in the technical side of making things and deciding how much is made. When it comes to the technical side, capitalists actually have an interest in making improvements because it helps their business grow. But for a single worker, every new technical change can hurt him. New machines and methods can lower the value of his work and make his job harder, more repetitive, and more tiring. Because of this, when trade unions try to get involved in the technical part of production, they end up fighting against technical innovation. This does not help all workers or help them break free from their difficult work, which is actually more in line with what the individual capitalist wants. In fact, workers' attempts to control the technical side of production were seen in the early days of trade unions in England, before 1860, when they still followed old medieval ideas and believed in the outdated rule of a fair day's wage for a fair day's labor.
On the other hand, the effort by labor unions to set fixed levels for production and prices is a new idea. We have only seen this happen recently, and again it has been tried in England. In many ways, these efforts are like those mentioned before. When trade unions try to control production and prices, they end up forming a kind of team between workers and business owners that stands against consumers and even against competing business owners. This is no different from what happens when employers form their own groups. It stops being a fight between labor and capital and becomes a show of unity between labor and capital against all consumers. Seen this way, it is considered a backward step because it goes against the real struggle for workers' freedom. In practical terms, it is like chasing a dream that cannot work for the big industries that sell their goods all over the world. So, the main job of trade unions is limited to trying to get higher wages and shorter work hours. In other words, they work to control the unfair treatment of workers based on the current state of the world market. But labor unions have no power to change the way production itself happens. In fact, contrary to what Conrad Schmidt says, the development of labor unions is actually moving toward a situation where the labor market becomes completely separate from the rest of the market. This is shown by the fact that even ideas like linking labor contracts to the overall state of production, such as using sliding wage scales, have become old-fashioned. British labor unions, for example, are moving further and further away from such methods. Even where labor unions are active, they cannot grow as much as some theories claim. Instead of a future where labor unions win big, we are headed toward a time when the challenges they face will become even tougher. Once industrial growth reaches its highest point and capitalism starts to decline on the world market, the struggle for unions will become doubly hard. First, the market will be less friendly to those selling their labor because demand for labor will rise more slowly and the supply of workers will grow faster than it does now. Second, business owners, trying to cover up losses in the world market, will work even harder to cut the share of profits that go to workers as wages. Marx pointed out that cutting wages is one of the main ways to slow down the drop in profits. In England, we can already see the beginning of a new stage for labor unions, where their actions are limited to defending what they have already won, and even that is becoming more difficult. This is the overall trend in society, and it should be met by a stronger political side in the class struggle. Conrad Schmidt's idea of history shows that a capitalist changes from being a full owner to just a manager. This does not match real history. In reality, a capitalist changes from being both an owner and a manager into simply being an owner. What happens to Schmidt here happened to Goethe as well. What is, he sees as in a dream. What no longer is, becomes for him reality. Just as Schmidt's idea goes backwards from a modern shareholding society to a small artisan's shop, he also wants the law to take the capitalist world back to the old feudal times of the Middle Ages. Also, the idea of social control looks very different in real life than what Schmidt sees. Today, things like labor laws and the control of companies through shareholding are what we call social control. These have nothing to do with his idea of supreme ownership. Instead of cutting down capitalist ownership as Schmidt believes, this social control actually protects that ownership. In economic terms, it is not a threat to the way capitalists use workers, it simply controls that process. When Bernstein asks if there is more or less socialism in a labor protection law, we can say that even the best labor law is no more socialist than a city rule for cleaning streets or turning on street lamps.